For you guys, I got my new hat. What do you guys think? Huh?
Yeah.
The hat this week. I woke up this morning, and we have a ranch in northern Wyoming right on the Montana border, 80 miles to the closest town. And so kind of woke up thinking about that this morning. So yeah, hope everybody's good.
Great.
Everybody's good?
Yeah.
Awesome.
As good as can be in a global pandemic.
Exactly, right? Yeah, totally. Awesome. Yeah, well, let's, maybe I think we got a fair amount of people. I think some more people will join, but let's get going. So, hey, thanks for, are you there? Hello? Oh, there's Balaji. Balaji, I got another hat. Where's your hat, man?
Oh, I can, 1 second.
John, you need to make it mandatory so that we're all ready.
I think so, right? We should make mandatory hats going forward. Oh, look at that. Look at that.
The rules are already creeping back in.
I know. Right?
The thing
nice.
is, my wife's hat stack is right behind me, so I can take out a new hat every time for 5 minutes and we can go on for 10 hours.
Perfect. I love it. That's awesome.
Pretty good one right there.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Hey, you look good.
Yeah. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining today. So I thought we'd shake it up a little bit. And one of the things that, after the last call, Karen, is that how you pronounce your last name, Karen?
You can pronounce it anywhere you want.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Well, Karen sent me a great article on mental wellness. And, as many of you guys know on the call, Bridget, my first wife, passed away a couple years, 2.5 years ago. She committed suicide because of some issues with mental illness. And I often think about, when this global pandemic, what does, mental wellness mean and kind of what should we all think about and how do we support each other? So I thought we'd try something new today. I spent a little time experimenting with Karen and Ray. So Karen, would love for you to talk for a couple minutes about just some of the research you're doing and the latest paper you wrote about how to support each other with some mental wellness stuff. And then Ray's going to run through a fun exercise for all of us and we'll see where it goes. Take the floor, Karen.
Yeah. So thank you, Catherine, Brandon, and John, for giving me the opportunity to contribute and to learn from the community. So just a little bit of background. I'm a case writer at HBS. I support faculty with their projects. So do a lot of cases on companies that were shaving costs. And then at the same time, like John, I have some personal, my family has been affected. And so after a friend of mine actually died by suicide from a toxic layoff, I started just to look at the data. And most of us at our age already know how, pervasive mental illness is. Either we have learned to manage it ourselves or we've had employees or friends or family members.
Determine where to start, right? I mean, you can also have.
Was that a question? I didn't hear. John, I think you're muted.
Somebody's just turning off their mute.
Okay. So, and then we started to do a little bit of research with Professor John Quelch, who's now at the University of Miami. And the question was, if this is so pervasive and if this is such a drag on productivity, why isn't it more central to the way that managers manage their teams? So we articulate our research around, sort of ourselves and the expansion to the community. And so when this question came up in the last call about what are the rules that are now out the window that could lead to exponential growth, it struck me that one of the big reasons that we are still where we are in mental health is stigma. And that one of the rules that I have seen now getting broken is people engaging much more on a human level and being much more vulnerable with each other in sharing that they're scared. And so, the tricky thing with high achieving people also is that part of the reason that we are where we are is because our pathologies have gotten us there. So some of the more neurotic people are very successful. So it's extremely difficult for people who are high powered to sort of address these things. COVID at this juncture has sort of stripped us of stigma just like that. And it's also put us in the exact same situation. And this is the opportunity that I see, which is we're actually need to face this reality that we're all going to emerge with some form of PTSD, as with the people that we're managing. And all the factors that were already complex, like loneliness or risk of burnout, which we used to address on a personal level. We could get together, we could have communities of faith, we could find other support. The workplace had, a lot of gyms and yogas, things like that. So all of this is out the window. So all the usual tools that we have are no longer available. And now we're sort of stuck with being online. So it's a great opportunity because you can actually engage with people honestly about how they feel, but it's also, I think, an enormous risk because often we conflate when we try to help each other and even ourselves on mental health is that our own experience will guide the way that we project out to the world. So for example, if I am a functioning alcoholic, I'm going to address somebody in my team in a very different way than if my father, for example, had been abusive because of a substance use disorder. So what Ray and I wanted to try to do today is to encourage us to think about how we are in this crisis, how we come to it, what maybe some of the biases. When we did our research, we interviewed a lot of managers and classified them in several categories. And so, you know, people have, there's the kangaroo personality, which will tend to protect an employee for too long and then not do anything. There's also more of the hyena person that will see somebody being weak and then pile on work for them or whatever. And so I think in this situation, we're at great risk for ourselves and also for others, if we don't take a little bit of time to reflect on how we're doing and sort of how we are to this crisis. The other stream of thought that I was curious to get some feedback on is how we think this is going to work out in a workforce that is increasingly remote and also in a hybrid workforce. So where you will be managing people on whom it's a lot easier to pick up some of the micro signals that you tend to see and sometimes miss when people are becoming increasingly stressed or might be developing mental ill health versus how you do that in an online world. I come from a very old-fashioned environment. For the most part, we've always worked at home. Remote work was not encouraged at all at HBS, and then suddenly we're all remote. So personally, as a manager of a team of researchers, I'm struggling with how do I take care of my team in a remote way and sort of exchanging best practices. So I think that Ray was going to
that's great, Karen.
an exercise so we have a lot of research and papers and things. So if I don't want to take too much time, I know that we're always on a very tight timing and so many great ideas to discuss. So, but I'm very grateful for anyone to reach out to me to give me ideas or if you need anything in this space.
That's great, Karen. We'll
Thank
make
you,
sure
John.
we put your information on the chat so everybody participate. If you have questions, we reprint the chat and send it out to everybody. So, all right, thanks so much. Really appreciate you providing the context, and you're doing some really great work, and I think it's important work. So, hey Ray, let's take it away, man. You're my man. So
Hey,
Ray and
okay.
I have been friends for a while, and Ray's just made the transition to being an executive coach. He's really doing some super cool work. So take it away, bud.
Yeah, so thanks a lot, John. It's great to be here with everybody. I've been on a few of these calls now, and they're just totally inspiring. So I'm a coach and facilitator at Reboot. We work a lot with founders and leaders in companies, primarily in the venture-backed startup space, and working with all kinds of industries and mainly small. But one of the main themes that we're seeing in our work these days is people are generally starting with the what rather than the who. So what am I going to do versus who am I as I'm showing up into this space? And it makes sense because we're in this uncharted territory. And to be clear, we're all in this uncharted territory together. So the challenge is that we're relying on strategies from the old known world or the old behaviors that may not apply to this new world. And so we can get frustrated, and because the old ways work for so long, we keep trying to use them, and we limit ourselves from actually discovering new ways forward and seeing the opportunities that this new territory may afford. So the way we discover these new opportunities is to actually slow down for a moment, let go of the need to discover what we need to, what the next right thing is to do, and instead reflect and listen to and pay attention to who we are and how we are doing. So an exercise we use to become present is a check-in. And we use the what we call red, yellow, green check-in, where red is triggered, my brain is offline, I'm not really present, you may see me, but I'm not here. Green is good, I'm completely, fully ready to go, I'm totally in the moment and totally connected. Yellow is somewhere in between where, I might be green with some flecks of yellow. I've got a little bit of red going on because, my kids are all behind me slowing down the internet because I can't, because everybody's doing homeschooling. Whatever it is, it's actually the idea though is to drop into actually where you are. So what we thought we would do is actually try this as an exercise today as an experiment and have a little bit of fun with it. But first, maybe John and I, you want to go ahead and just model this one time, John?
Yeah, let's do it.
Everybody?
Yeah,
Great,
let's do
buddy.
it.
So how you doing today?
I'm doing good. I'd say mostly green, a little bit of yellow, and then a little hint of red. I had a difficult conversation with my mom this morning, so that kind of threw me for a little bit of loop, but kind of coming out of that in a little bit better. How about you? How are you doing?
Actually, I'm green too. I feel I look forward to these calls every week, and then I've got some, and then Karin and I spoke a little bit prior to this call, so that got me really pumped up. But I will say that I'm a little yellow as we kind of walk into this experiment because I really want it to go well. But and so whenever you try something new, it's just can be a little hairy. So that's kind of fun. And a little yellow. So what we're going to do is we're going to break everybody up into breakout rooms of 2 people in each room and give you guys a chance to check in with each other. And so you're going to have 2 minutes each. So 4 minutes in total, and then we're going to bring you back. So Brandon's going to hook us up and we'll see if this technology will work for us here.
Take it away, Brandon.
All right. I'm feeling a little yellow here, so.
No, it's okay.
There you go,
It's the new us. It's the new us.
Sure.
You have to be vulnerable and try. It's okay.
All right, here we go. Good luck, everybody.
See you back in 4 minutes.
All right, join breakout room.
All right. How's everybody doing? Coming back online.
All right. Everybody's coming back.
Everybody's coming back. Got about a third back so far.
That was cool. I'd never done a breakout room before.
I know, I have neither. It was super fun, right?
Yeah, learn something new every day. I mean,
Yeah.
I knew it was possible, but I never, never tried it. So cool.
Yeah, it's a really powerful way to actually, just show up in an intimate session.
Yeah, to break up the big screen action. It's a great idea.
Yeah, and there are lots of different ways to kind of break those things up.
And that is a
So-
regular Zoom feature, just out of curiosity?
Yes.
Yes, it is. You have to go to settings and turn on breakout rooms.
That's really cool.
I think you may have
Was
to
that
be a
random
paying
who you
customer.
picked, or was that, did you already design it ahead of time as to who gets who?
It was random, Balaji.
Randomly.
That's
It was just-
awesome.
Yeah, isn't that fun? I love the random nature of it, just getting to know each other and kind of a new way of operating. So well, thanks. I think most people are back on. So let's maybe how was that for everybody?
Super cool.
Good.
Yeah, it was very cool.
Good. Awesome.
Yeah, that's great.
Good.
Thanks a
Well,
lot,
thanks
everybody.
for doing that.
And you bet, man.
No, great. Ray,
Pleasure.
any final thoughts on that?
Well, I think that the main theme here is really the idea that we, as we turn a little bit more to the who we are in this situation rather than what we're going to do. And if we just take a moment to say, where are you? How am I showing up? It actually allows you then to say, how do I want to be in this next move that I'm going to make? And that's really the intention.
I love that. All right. Well, thanks, Ray. Thanks, Karen,
Thanks
for
a lot.
leading that. That was super fun. Really, really love that. And I'm getting some really great comments here. So hopefully that brought us a little bit tighter together with the group. And maybe we'll do this again to kind of reconnect with some new people each week.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks. Well, let's make sure everybody puts our mute on so we don't have a lot of crosstalk. So as you guys know from the note, I was super inspired by this McKinsey article on strategy and structural breaks. And I was really into it. I sent it to a few people and I sent it to John Healy. And John Healy said, hey, do you know when that article was written? And I was like, no. So I looked at the date. It was in 2008. And I could have sworn it was written in the last few weeks. So really interesting to see how, dealing with structural breaks and crises, there's a lot of similarities. So I would, when I read that, I thought about, what's the question for the week? And really the thing that inspired me, or what policies, procedures, and habits have you and your organization stopped doing and now realize you won't go back to after the crisis ends? So I kind of selected a few people to talk about this and would love to, for sure, shoot your notes over on the side. The article link just went up. Catherine just put that link up, or Brandon did. So anyway, first up is Chris Stanton from HBS. And Chris, you want to share on that, what's been happening that isn't happening anymore, and what won't happen after everybody comes back? Thanks.
Yeah, so I think Karen kind of mentioned what's happening on the HBS side, where we're all remote, we're all teaching remotely via Zoom. I think we're kind of Zoom experts now, but I've been polling my students around some of this to try and get perspective around what their old organizations are doing, or where their sort of landing spots might be, and what's changed there. And to be honest with you, I don't have a great takeaway to share, except for one anecdote where one student said, everything has just changed and it's hard to forecast what's going to stick and what won't. But her response was sort of overwhelmingly positive, that there was sort of a failure to notice that there was a new model. And she said that it's profound to her that this nudge, or this forced experimentation, has overcome some profound sort of psychological resistance to change, and that the overwhelming sort of thought that she had in terms of her contact list and where she's going to end up over the summer, which is, I think, in post HBS, which is, I think, in a consulting role, is that there was just sort of a way of doing things, and now people realize that they don't have to travel to a client site 3 or 4 days a week, and that this sort of experiment has overcome some profound psychological resistance to moving to new ways of working that may ultimately end up being healthier. So rather than having consultants on a plane twice or 3 times a week or 4 times a week, this may reduce burnout or reduce the need to have profound face time. Other people sort of responded that there is the loss of the spontaneous interactions in the hallways, or the loss of some of the sense of downtime or buffer time that allows you to collect your thoughts, because I think most people are transitioning between Zoom meetings on a half-hourly basis, and we're not sort of building in the amount of time that we might need to think about sort of where we had time to walk between meetings or to schedule people with a little bit of buffer because we thought that things might run over. There might have been unanticipated logistical challenges. And now there are no logistical challenges other than like getting into the Zoom link and hitting the CAPTCHAs correctly to sign up for a meeting. So I think that we're just in a profound sort of time where people are reflecting on what they may do differently. As a result of that, one of the things that I have tried to do is to actually write an HBS case about Zoom, because Zoom is probably the organization that has taken the brunt of this. And if you don't know anything about the Zoom internal organizational structure, I didn't either before I started this process, but ironically, and this might not be ironically to many of you on the call who operate remote or freelance marketplaces or remote teams, but Zoom was not really eating their own dog food. So they had a strong in-office culture, and many of the open platforms that I have talked to or worked with also tended to have this bias that it was like, we build the tools, but we don't use the tools ourselves. And Zoom was in the same boat. Zoom was not using Zoom itself for their day-to-day operations. Everyone sort of came into the office, worked regular hours, and then went home. And so for them, it's just really interesting that they had to make that change. But they have grown 20x over the course of 8 weeks based on their public disclosures. And so the first thing that they did was just put out the fires and buy as much bandwidth as possible. The second thing that they did was say that we're going to accelerate the next 3 years of our hiring into 6 months, and we're going to onboard all of those people remotely. And then what these interviews have just left me wondering is what the role of strategy and what the role of planning is versus just the immediate need to execute. And as I've thought about that through the Zoom lens, I suspect that many people on the call are facing the same thing in terms of the balance between reacting versus the balance of long-term planning. And so I thought that would be an interesting lens through which to think about some of these practice changes over the long term, which would be sort of, what have you just had to do to make it through these crazy several weeks versus how are you thinking about being more thoughtful for long-term planning, long-term strategy, and whether the partners at your firm are going to be returning to hop on a plane 2 to 3 days a week, or whether this is a longer term change. So I'll leave it at that, but thanks so much.
Yeah, that's great, Chris. That's so brilliant to do a case study on Zoom. It certainly seems like it's the center of this whole rapid, revolution to remote and all things new. So yeah, thanks for that. Hey, I'd love to get a perspective from the financial side of things. So Jordy Pearson, Jordy is from Falfurus Capital Partners, and he and I, chatted a few weeks ago, and I was really intrigued with what they're doing, and his kind of intrigue with the whole open talent and remote work world. So Jordy, you want to share kind of some of the things you're seeing, what's been broken, and what will probably, not what's been broken, but what's been left behind and what will stay left behind going forward?
Yeah, sure. And I appreciate you guys having me. We're, as some background, we we're a private equity firm that invests in middle market businesses. So our companies tend to be, employee sizes of 50 to 1,000. So not nearly the size of some of our other peers, but decent sized middle market companies. Chris, I thought your comments were interesting to see what's changed in the short term and then how we're thinking about long term across our portfolio. And our portfolio is fairly diverse. I spend the majority of my time in marketing, media, and information services, and we're increasingly doing some work around the future of work and how to invest in that space. But more broadly, I think what we've found across our companies over the past 6 weeks now has been a real struggle to maintain culture and connectivity with our workforce and keep morale up. And so I think as we've talked to our CEOs, that's been probably at the forefront of the last 6 weeks is maintaining communication and trying to keep people in high spirits, relative to what's going on. The first thing we did the first 2 weeks of the outbreak was really to speak with each of our companies to make sure that they were able to have their employees safe. And so I think long term, there's probably more of a commitment to, a commitment to culture, more so than we see it in the past, and being a bit more employee focused than perhaps we were a month ago. I think that'll have long-term implications. As we think about short term in the next couple months, what's changed, a real commitment to safety, when we get back to work. We have several companies that have call centers, several food manufacturing companies where folks are pretty clustered together. And so I think we're actively thinking through how do we keep those folks safe and an ability to return to work. And so safety, cleanliness, are probably, to the detriment of some productivity level will be how we're responding. I think, more broadly, some key themes across what we're seeing is we believe there's going to be a large disintermediation of, global supply chains, particularly in companies like us. And so, where we had some companies with global supply chains, those have been dramatically impacted. And so we're actively thinking about long-term, how do we reshore various, physical good movements, as well as, how do we think through the supply chain of our people, which I think will be increasingly spread out. We're finding that the companies that were more remote before this are thriving and probably will have more long-term benefits coming out of this than those that were, concentrated in specific locations. And so I think as we think about not only backup plans, but also the benefits of a remote workforce, we're increasingly pushing our teams to do that. Other themes are virtual and travel. I think, your comment on getting on planes, I think that will be reduced. A lot of our business naturally is a high relationship, high touch business. We tend to have meetings 3 or 4 times. I think that those initial meetings will tend to happen more remotely and a bit more efficiently than they have in the past. And then as you get further into those relationships, I think there will still be a need for in-person touch points, but at least, the initial vetting, I think will change. Similar to, our sales forces, a lot of our companies, their sales force were historically relying on big events, which have obviously been dramatically impacted. So I think that we're trying to think through more nimble marketing tactics, whether it's Zoom calls or, even how do we efficiently, get our brand out from a scale perspective that may not be dependent upon hiring a lot of new sales folks, in terms of leveraging our customer base more from a referral perspective. I think broadly, we're seeing consumer behaviors in some industries change and won't come back. We have a food business where we think that, a month and a half ago, very few boomers did, grocery delivery. We think that could potentially be a long-term trend. And there's other, consumer end markets that I think the last month will have, long-term implications where it just won't snap back. And I think, access to talent will change. For our companies a month and a half ago, the number one pain point for 80% of them was finding talent. I think that will change, going forward. But at the same time, we'll be rethinking about how do we effectively staff our businesses, both at the C-suite as well as internally. And so a lot of the work that we're doing, in the future of work is that we think that, that there's merit to this long term, that there's going to be increasing momentum towards this model. and one of the reasons why we're spending a lot of time on it from an investment perspective. John, I don't know if that.
That's awesome, man. I know. I think one of the things I love about these calls is the diversity of perspectives. So I really appreciate that, Jordy. I think it's really great to get your perspective on it. And you know, you're sitting there advising folks and trying to make investments and predict the future, and those are really hard decisions. So thanks for that. Really appreciate it. Hey, Jeff Carbuck from 10X, would love for you to lean in. We had a great conversation last week, and I think Jeff, you know, sits over you're in, where are you, in Edinburgh, right?
Correct.
And are you there? Yeah, there you are. And so I, you know, had some interesting global perspectives, but I'd love for you to lean in for a couple minutes.
Yeah, I mean, I think just quickly a couple of things. So first of all, you know, we like Zoom. You know, we're not nearly as large as Zoom. We haven't had the growth, but you know, we're also an online platform company. So what we do is we do strategy consulting, but every project that we staff with all freelance consultants and industry experts, and they all work remote and distributed. And we're a global firm, even though we're relatively small, we're only 30. So, but we do have an office in New York, and I live in Edinburgh. And prior to this current situation, I would travel back and forth every month and spend 2 weeks in New York. So, you know, one of the things that's happened is that's obviously stopped. But we've also recognized that we don't need to have an office in New York, and even the people that are based in New York can work remotely. So I think we will do exactly what we were discussing, which is transition our own operations to the platform that we use to deliver work to our client. And that's already happened and had a big effect. So, you know, Chris, I think what you're writing and talking about is really important. I'd say the second thing is that we're developing a culture. It's not 100% there yet, where we use Zoom and Slack and other tools for spontaneous interaction. So rather than, you know, saying, hey, do you have time to talk? You know, let's set up a call, blah, blah, blah. You just open up a video chat channel. And obviously you have to be respectful for the fact that people are, you know, working more flexibly, but the idea is not to check whether somebody's working. The idea is to catch somebody and have a more extemporaneous engagement. And I think the thing that's happened from that is we've actually had a lot more personal conversations online, you know, many of them talking about what are we doing to adapt to the new circumstance. One of my favorite questions is, what are you doing now that you always wanted to do, but you didn't have the time or the focus to do? And have a conversation about that. It's amazing what people are doing. Everything from baking bread. I'm swimming in the North Sea every other day, so that's my little thing. Anyway, the point is that, yeah, and the point is that I think the outcome of this is that we're actually more connected personally because of this, and part of it is driven by, you know, this awareness of mental health and isolation, and it's just a different type of stress and anxiety that people are dealing with. And I think those interpersonal connections and dialogues done remotely will be something we continue to do. I think we'll continue to operate remotely. And I think as a team, we're actually going to be much more extemporaneous and getting online and chatting with each other in a way that more, I think, effectively reflects how you might do it if you're in an office and you just pop your head in and ask somebody how their weekend was, or have a chat at the coffee machine or whatever. So those aren't big things, but I actually think that they make a big deal over time. And you know, they don't show up immediately in the sales numbers or in the productivity of product delivery, but I think in terms of people's health and well-being over time, it will have a big impact. So I think it's important to focus on those dimensions.
I love that. You know, one of the things I've always, you know, thought about in the brand world when I was writing books is like, you know, small is the new big, right? And so kind of the simplicity of small ideas really can change the world. And I love that idea of being able to connect with neighbors and being simple. So we were gonna have Perry, she runs a bunch of stuff at Unilever on the call, but unfortunately she got jumped off. So I'm gonna do a random here, and I'm gonna call on CJ. CJ is a good friend and has a super cool company called Inkwell that kind of was, you know, traditional publisher, but then built for this in a weird way. So, you know, I would love for you to think about, you know, or talk about kind of what you're seeing out there, CJ.
Well, thanks, John. Hello, everybody. Yeah, I it's been a interesting 5 weeks, 6 weeks. I in our breakout said I'm flaming yellow right now as a small company in this environment. We only have 10 employees, so we're to John's point, maybe we have big ideas with a small group. Really what we've done over the past 6 years with Inkwell is network individuals as micro media companies to create a big media footprint. We work for brands by assembling those individuals on a social level and then putting out messaging that really does operate like a big media company. We've got a reach of about 75 million people. And that's been great business for us in this environment with advertising sort of shutting down. It's been challenging. But what we've done is try to go back and really have human conversations with our clients in regard to the challenges, and some of the ways that you guys are expressing, how can we help with the capabilities that we have to solve the new problems that they're facing. And that really is, to be honest about it, it's really just been a very human conversation with our clients, like this, trying to get face-to-face on Zoom and say, what challenges are you facing right now, and how can we come in and solve that? And being a small company, we do have that sort of capability to pivot into, okay, can we solve a new problem that no one's ever thought of really, given what we're facing. So I would say that's the sort of the number one insight for Inkwell, is that we've really just had to strip it down to going out to our existing, we have about 20 client base who are all facing challenges, and come in and try to be as human as possible and say, how can we help you solve the problems that you didn't have, 6 weeks ago?
Thanks, CJ. CJ and I were on a conversation yesterday, and one of the things that CJ and I have known each other for a while, but one of the things I'm totally blown away with is, they started by representing outdoor athletes, to put them on Instagram and in social media. And we were looking at some numbers yesterday, and in 2014, 6 years ago, representing 5 athletes with 100,000 reach. And today it's 400 athletes with 75 million reach. So you can see that I think it's a really interesting reflection on where the world's going, is smaller organizations, individual athletes have this amazing, immense power to influence ideas. So the organizational size a lot smaller. So thanks for sharing that. Hey, I want to call next Simon Chin. So Simon is with Communitech up in Canada. We had a really interesting conversation a couple of weeks ago about public-private partnerships and what's happening in kind of place-based areas to think about the future of work and what's happening, not just public-private, but also academic relationships. So Simon, you got a couple minutes to share some of the things you're thinking about?
Yeah, thanks, John. Thanks for the opportunity, and good to see everyone. It actually snowed in Canada, so surprisingly. So as John said, I'm from an organization called Communitech. We're not-for-profit, public and privately funded. And what we've been doing over the last about year now is we've kind of been thinking about this notion of the future of work. And so we actually pulled together a collaborative, or a coalition, if you want to call it, of about 20 companies in our region. Everything from the universities and colleges here to private and public sector. And because we're focused on tech, we've got, startup and scale up companies here, and then large enterprise companies like Manulife Financial / John Hancock, TD Bank, Deloitte, et cetera. So a cross section. So it's been really interesting to watch COVID hit, because not only do we see what's happening within our organization, which is about 100 people, but we see what's happening with these 20 other organizations and what's happening in the region. So kind of that diversity of perspectives. Obviously, most of the organizations have gone remote. And so because of that, I'm starting to see kind of 2 general areas that are emerging around changes to employee experience and changes to how people approach the customer in terms of the business model shift. So the first one around kind of remote, we've gone from, in Canada, we've gone from 10 to 40% working remotely from home. I'm starting to see, the usuals where, the etiquette's changing around meetings, et cetera. But especially really early on, what I saw was a lot of people just throw out their traditional roles and responsibilities and just get at the problem at hand. And so quickly, a lot of these organizations formed cross-functional teams, tiger teams, to approach specific problems, kind of an all hands on deck approach. But the idea was to move with speed. They broke a lot of the rules that they would have had in place for traditional decision making. And they had people who were doing, you used to say someone who's a product manager, how can they, get into communications? Well, you'd have product managers writing like crisis comms just to get at those things. And so I think that's kind of the early survival mechanisms. What I see staying is a couple of things. I think this whole on-demand model, I'm hearing more and more organizations say, coming out of this, the CFOs are saying we need to find ways to reduce expenses. So they're looking at space, but they're also looking at how do you have a much more flexible workforce model. And so how do we think about things in a much more on-demand way where you still have full-time employees, but you expand and contract given the situation that you're trying to deal with, and also be much more tiger team project-based, like they were, to move quickly and nimbly to be able to solve problems. I'm also hearing a lot more around different forms of work, like work share, 4 days a week, different flexible models, again, to try to get at some of the cost piece, but also get at how do you tackle those challenges. And one of the most interesting ones I've heard is employers starting to use remote work as a value proposition, not just around like being flexible, being able to cut down on your commute, et cetera, but for climate change. So there's been, if you guys have followed, what's going on across the world, you'll see, air quality is improving in different areas, et cetera. And so one of our universities, Wilfrid Laurier here, did a study and said it was like a 40% drop in air quality, or improvement in air quality in Toronto and Kitchener-Waterloo, where I'm from. And so organizations are starting to now say, you know what, like I can actually embed that in my value proposition when I talk to people and recruit them and say, not only I'm going to give you a flexible work environment, but we're actually socially responsible as it relates to climate change. And because of that, come work for us. So it's an interesting talent attraction play that I'm seeing. The other one just around business models. Again, thinking survival and then actually how you come out of it. I'll give you a simple example. University of Waterloo is kind of a top innovative university here, known globally. They move quick. And so they have one of the world's largest co-op programs. And obviously in March, when things happened, a lot of the co-op students were kind of left hanging. And so they basically quickly moved about 8,000 students into a remote co-op environment. So they'd moved and deployed really quickly. But what they're doing now is they're actually serving the students that were disrupted. They're serving the workplaces that were disrupted. And they're now thinking about how do I design solutions for the fall, for the incoming co-op cohort, to make sure that they are able to work remotely. They're also just assuming that down the road, we're going to have much more remote work. And so how do you build programs and infrastructure in place to help co-op students be virtually savvy and think about taking art students and giving them e-commerce fundamentals, digital marketing fundamentals, because they're going to go into small to medium-sized businesses who have to convert their business model from physical to digital. How do you deploy students to do that? So those are just some things that I've seen in terms of how organizations have moved rapidly around the employee side of things, around their own business models. And then I think a lot of stuff will continue to remain in place as people figure out how to find the opportunity. And just last point from a tech perspective, the amount of money that I'm hearing about and starting to see go into collaboration and video technology. I think we assume that collaboration and video is going to be what it is today. But much like, I don't know if you guys know this, but apparently it was YouTube's 15-year anniversary today. Imagine what it's going to be like. I mean, my kid watches more YouTube than anything else, right? Imagine what it's going to be like 5 to 7 years from now, or even 2 years from now, with the amount of money that's going into video and collaboration technology. I think it's going to be remote work and on-demand open talent is going to boom.
All right, that's great, Simon. Thanks for bringing that perspective to us. Really, really appreciate it. Hey, so one of the most influential books and thinkers, that over the last couple of decades for me was, a book called Eat Big Fish, and it was Mark Barton and Adam Morgan. So I've got Mark was, kind enough to be a part of the call and thought, it'd be great to kind of think about this from a strategic and brand perspective. What are you seeing out there, Mark?
Maybe I don't want to answer that question. Hi, everyone. So yeah, Eat Big Fish is a small boutique consultancy. All of our work was delivered in workshop-based programs. So I thought by now we'd probably be out of business, but that hasn't happened because of the way the world has responded to wanting to come online and do the kind of work we're doing. But I think what I want to say is go back to the beginning of what Karen said about emotionally what's happening for people. And I've got a feeling that, post any crisis, there's that kind of surge of heroic missions happening in the world. And there's a honeymoon period that we're in right now where we're all clearly enjoying working remotely, finding ways to connect in new ways, get productively a lot done very quickly. But I worry about what happens when this gets old 2 or 3 months from now, and we start to go into the plunge of despair, which is how long is this going to take? And as much as I've been super impressed actually with how well this kind of working environment can be, how productive we can be like this, what I've started to realize now is when you are face to face with people, there's a lot of really subtle, almost subconscious evaluation of what's happening that you can't read when you're on tiny little cubes like we all are now. So body language, pupil dilation, all that stuff I don't even know that I'm processing while I'm face to face has gone missing. And I think I'm going to start to notice that breaking certain processes that we've been involved in, because I can't really get a very strong intuitive sense of how well things are working. So as much as I think it's exciting what's happening now, I do think that these kind of conversations about let's be really sophisticated and sensitive about how we evaluate the impact on human beings working together, decisions that are made, and really important decisions that stick. Because you can't get to the hell yes on a Zoom call. You can get to okay, I'll put something in chat that says yes, agreed. But I think the big ideas and the commitment to big ideas and the stickiness that comes with that, I'm not sure that I can sense that yet on Zoom. So maybe I'll just develop new skills, and maybe we'll realize that as human beings, we want to get together. I mean, one of the things I said to somebody the other day was it costs about 60 grand in hard costs to get 30 people into a series of workshops. I'm giving all that money back to clients, and the clients are going, this is awesome. I have 60 grand, put it back in the budget. I wonder if that will actually stick, or will we nostalgically swing right back to, I want to go and meet with human beings. I mean, somebody was telling me how much canned food is on the rise right now. Who would have predicted that? I think we might nostalgically go back to wanting to meet in person, and that the future will be some kind of hybrid, and we'll figure out what work can be done really, really well on Zoom and other digital platforms, and what kind of work needs to be done in person, where we are literally and metaphorically holding hands again on big decisions. So that's the kind of thing I'm thinking about.
Yeah, that's awesome, Mark. Thanks so much. Really, really appreciate that. And I always really appreciate your guys' perspective on kind of seeing things from a 30,000 foot level and what it means. That's a good point. These kind of trends and counter trends, right? It's kind of every time there's a big trend one way, there's always really interesting kind of counter trends that are happening as well. Hey, I got a note from Balaji that wanted to just make a quick comment. Balaji, you want to jump in here?
Yeah, and I want to bring this down from 30,000 foot level to a 3 foot level when you're a working couple that is managing a 3-year-old toddler, and the impact of the absence of a defined work and a defined life for many of us. I know for me and for many of my friends, going to work was a refuge from everything that is happening at home, and coming back home for many people was a refuge from what is happening at work. Not having that separation of this work and life. And right now I wake up at 6 in the morning, work till 2:30 and 3. My wife starts at 2:30 and 3 and works till 10. So basically there's just no break. It's just all life that is happening with zero breaks. And my wife works in real estate, and she says our homes were never designed to be lived in this much. The homes were not structured for us to be present in them for 24 hours a day without leaving, where homes are now places for workout, places for entertainment, places for socializing, places for hobbies, places for life, places for work, places for sleep, places for relationships. We never existed. And I think the impact of of that on mental health, of not having some sense of, boxes where we used to comfortably live our lives. And it's all now one huge box, that too in these open floor situations, is really rough for people. And I think we need to explore those lack of that separation and what that is doing to families, to people, and as colleagues and companies as a result of that.
Yeah, I think that's a super important point. I think it's changed so much for so many of us. And I also would encourage you to take it one step further, Balaji, to think about, let's all think about ways we can support not only each other here in this conference, but, being able to check in, like Ray said earlier, with your cohorts, with your, not only with the people that you work with at work, but also with your spouse, with your kids. Yeah. Like, how do you get everybody aligned and communicating in a better way? I mean, I think that's kind of the first step to all this for sure. Yeah. Hey, so, Paul Estes, are you there?
I am.
Well, so Paul and I have known each other for a couple of years, and one of the things I love about Paul is not only has this crisis like changed everything in our lives, but Paul was in the midst of this huge transition himself into the future. I don't know if many of you know, but Paul kind of ran future of work at Microsoft and has a site called staffing.com. He's doing some really great work, but it's been an incredible evangelist on kind of moving this forward. And what I love about it is not only, there's so many people that can talk the talk, but Paul's really walked the walk. And so, from being on the corporate side to figuring it out from that side of things, and now being out there as a freelancer and building his own stuff. So you always have a unique perspective, and I just thought it would be fun to kind of get your perspective on things here, Paul.
I'm officially a corporate refugee. You are correct. One of the things I was planning to do a ton of events and speaking, and I've built, I don't know if everybody can see, but I built a virtual production studio. So now we have a LinkedIn Live show every Wednesday. And so I'm using this moment to figure out what does connecting virtually mean. So Wednesdays at 4:30 Eastern, if you want to check it out. There's three things though I'd like to leave people with. One is directly what you were talking about, Balaji. I remember my wife on day one of working from home, sitting in her chair from 7 to 6 o'clock, not even eating lunch. And she came downstairs and she was, needless to say, a little grumpy. And I think what I learned when I moved remote was that I had to change the way I worked. And meetings, for the most part, I rail against them. I think, this is a good conversation where everybody's participating, but the way people work needs to change, and you need to block out time for yourself. And that's something that I'm very religious about, whether it's going for a walk or staring at a tree. The second thing is, last week and this week, I've talked to a number of CEOs from collaboration companies, whether it's Mural or Doist or even Tasso at TopTal. And the one thing that they're all seeing is a significant growth in demand. And so, and Prezi as well, all of these software and solutions that are remote first or designed for remote and collaboration, they're seeing a massive increase of demand. And so the CEO of Mario at Mural said, hey, I used to, he's been working on the project for 9 years. It's a whiteboard collaboration software. And he goes, I used to get requests to deploy seats at 25 or 30 seats per company. And now he's getting requests for thousands and thousands of seats. And so, the proof is in the reaction to the way people are engaging in these new technologies. And so I encourage everyone on the shows and the talks that I do to really start to understand these technologies. It's an opportunity to embrace them. Like someone was saying, Zoom didn't eat their own dog food. I worked at Microsoft where a lot of people didn't use the technology that they were working on. There's a whole new way we need to train ourselves from a technology perspective in this new world. And I encourage everyone to start looking at those remote first software and services. The third thing I'd leave you with is, last night I went to go pick up food for my family. And I ran into a guy who had listened to one of the podcasts. He's a surgeon here at the UW. And he said, I said, well, how are you doing? How are you doing surgery? He goes, well, I'm only doing, he's a cancer surgeon. He says, I only work on, mission critical stuff, but all of my consults and stuff are now telemedicine. And I said, well, did you do telemedicine before? He goes, no, they had some pilot program, but it wasn't really a big deal. Everything was done in the office. The people that he works with are older. They had to come and pay for parking and all this sort of stuff. And he said, it is clear to me that the hospital is now institutionalize telemedicine as a service going forward. So it's no longer sort of a pilot program. It is how service will be delivered going forward. And he said, it also allows me to provide better care. And so, you know, we often think about all of the way we work, but we don't think of the tangential services, maybe like telemedicine and some others. And I even have a first grade teacher I did a podcast with a couple of weeks ago that we released it, who's now doing his parent teacher conferences via Zoom. And he said it's in the podcast, hey, this is not something I thought was normal, but now I think it's better because he gets to talk to both parents, not one. Anybody who has children knows the trade-off of which parent is going to the conference and which one's not. He gets to talk to both parents and it's in their home. And so in this unique moment, you know, we're all talking to each other from our homes, which is much more personal. And so those are sort of three things that I've seen in just the past week that I wanted to share.
Paul, that's awesome. Thanks so much. Hey, I think, you know, as I hear everybody talk, you know, one of the things that I'm really intrigued with, and I think John Healy, are you still here, John? John, I think flipped me a note, and I'll put it out on the, you know, send it out to everybody. But Jeff Galloway wrote a really great piece on education and future of education and challenges, you know, to the typical old ways of doing things, especially at a university level. So Paul, thanks for reminding me of that. Really appreciate it. So I guess we're right at the time. And I just want to tell you guys, I really appreciate you guys. You guys are becoming, you know, family every week. I love kind of checking in with everybody. And a special thanks to Karen and Ray for, you know, being able to ask why not and try some new technology. And I hope everybody enjoyed that. Please hit me up if there's any questions, any ideas for next week. Always lots going on in the group. And if there's anything that's, you know, happening in your world that you'd love to talk about, or you see an insight that would be great to kind of dive in as a subject, would love to have your input on that. So thanks again, guys. Really appreciate it. I'm going to shoot you guys, or we'll shoot you guys out the chat today. And I really love you guys and really appreciate every one of you. So thanks again. Take care. Have a great weekend.
Take care of yourselves.
Ciao, ciao.
All right.
Take care.